Hi, my name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of How Did That Happen? This week, we are discussing garbage and trash cans. I find out who invented the trash can, and I'm still trying to figure out what crockery is. Come along for the ride this week as I ask, garbage and trash cans, how did that happen? All right, back for another episode. This is episode Trace 33. We're doing garbage, trash cans, and anything that's like garbage and trash can related. I'm sure it gets, I we go a couple different ways. I end up going down a quick rabbit hole, which I do at least acknowledge and actually provide some theme music for. But you'll get to that as the show goes on. Some things to get out before I actually get on with the topic. Once again, I'd love to see what you guys are doing on the Twitter page, all the interaction I'm getting with that. We topped 1,100 followers. Recently, I posted that I was going to see that movie, Nope, by Jordan Peele, and I did. Went to see it on Saturday. I caught a matinee, so there wouldn't be that many people in there. And it was pretty good. It wasn't, when I said that, my dad was like, oh, that means you didn't like it. But what I told him, I was just like, Jordan Peele set the bar so high with his past, the last two movies that he made, that I don't know, I just was expecting my mind to just be blown, like if anybody else had made the movie that he made, there would be just, that person would also shoot to the top of the charts, or to, the top of like, being the best directors out there. But it was good. My mind just wasn't blown. I think that's probably the thing. Like I left this theater, I guess with my mind still intact, and I was like, thought my mind would be blown. But it was good. It was a good movie. It was definitely a good movie. I'm not saying any shade. You should definitely, give it your time. I may even have to watch it again. I'm thinking about that, honestly. They got some discount stuff going on at the theater that I go to. I may just slip it back in there and try to catch another showing of it. Still gonna kind of try to keep this segment that I'm doing here, I guess, a little bit about what I've read. Recently, I just finished Eat, Pray, Love, and I will say that it was not a bad book. I have not seen the movie yet, and I do intend to track it down and give it a watch because I love me some Julia Roberts. So either way, even if it is not up to her as far as how good the subject matter is, but it was a good book. I've always heard about it, but I've never actually laid my eyes on it. So would I recommend it? I think so. But you guys are like, all right, enough with the books and the movies. Like we came here to find out how trash cans happen. So without further ado, you guys, talking about trash cans and garbage and other things like that this week. So we will start, like with most things, at the beginning and try to get all the way up to the point where trash cans and garbage removal become kind of ubiquitous within society. But we have to first start in Knossos, Crete. Hope that I got that right. So the first landfill was said to be in 3000 BC in Knossos, Crete. If it's not, let me know. If it's Knossos, let me know. Hit me in the comments. But an article I read said that the people there would dig deep holes to hide their refuse. And I wasn't sure if they actually meant like human waste or actual trash, but that was one of the first places where people started to put things that they didn't want anymore, kind of nasty things, if you will. And refuse, not to be confused with refuse, as in to turn down. Refuse, as we intend to talk about, is defined as non-hazardous solid waste that requires collections and transport to a processing or disposal site. And so basically, that's what I was saying. So basically, they were like, getting rid of their trash, essentially. In 500 BC, in Athens, residents were forbidden from throwing trash in the streets, and they had a law that stipulated that waste had to be disposed of at least a mile outside the city, and families were responsible for disposing of their own trash. And that's an interesting perspective, because imagine how much less trash you would generate if it was your job to collect and dispose of it entirely. Imagine right now, all the trash in your house, you have to. And for some people, I mean, it's not actually that far-fetched for some people, because I know where I went to college at was a small town, and they actually didn't have trash removal. So when you got rid of your trash, you loaded it up in your car and you took it out to the landfill, which makes you more conscious of like when your trash starts to build up. But think about if you had to get rid of all of your trash by yourself, it would probably make you a little more conscious of what you dispose of. The Romans created the first garbage collection service. The Greeks, like we said, were responsible for taking it out themselves, but the Romans had a system where people would throw their garbage into the streets, which is pretty anti-Greek, and then it would be collected by a guy on horseback who would take it to a big hole outside the city that they had dug. So that's pretty interesting. It is. I mean, it really is when you think about it at its foundation, pretty much what we have now, just in a very, old and smaller scale with a guy on a horse, dragging it out. So we've been burning our trash for more than 2,000 years. And in the Middle Ages, they were not very clean by modern standards. And by food and garbage, it littered the landscape of those cities, which is actually pretty common when you look at a lot of cities during that time. This was what led to the rat infestations that would eventually cause the plague, otherwise known as the Black Death of 1349. And I mentioned it before on this podcast, on other episodes, but the Black Death still exists. Blew my mind when I found that out. It's not a conspiracy theory. You can look it up online. It still exists. Something like 20 people a year still get it. So that's just pretty wild when you think about it. Something that I did not know. In European cities, it was common for residents to dispose of rotting food and other trash by throwing it out the window. This would attract wild dogs, feral creatures, and other disease-spreading pests. And by 1388, English Parliament had made a rule that no one could dispose of garbage in public waterways, which you would think would be a no-brainer, but don't get me wrong, isn't that still happening to this day? Answer, yes. And if we're hearing that sound, that means that we're about to go down a Richard rabbit hole. Just hang on real tight. You're about to get some unnecessary information that may or may not actually pertain to what we just talked about, but it will all be over pretty soon. This information that I got here is from an organization called the Center for Public Integrity, so why would they lie? It says that in Ringwood, New Jersey, the Ford Motor Company dumped more than 35,000 tons of toxic paint sludge onto lands occupied for centuries by the Turtle Clan of the Ramapaw, Lenape, I'm definitely getting this wrong, tribe. They're basically Native American Indian tribes, and poisoning their groundwater with arsenic, lead, and other harmful chemicals. So they're still doing it. And today, more than 43 years after that dumping ended, those toxins are still in the groundwater and still threaten the reservoir, providing drinking water to millions of residents of New Jersey. So the answer, like I said, is yes, they still do that. They've been doing it for hundreds, if not thousands of years, sadly enough. But since I'm on this rabbit hole, I might as well drop another piece of knowledge on you. There's a chemical named glyphosate or glyphosate, which is a controversial weed killer that has been linked to cancer. And in a recent study, which I may post a link for, but at least you could find it yourself on CBS News, was found that over 80% of the people on that sample had that chemical in their urine. And so that's just been going around the podcast circuit. I figured I'd say it too. But back to garbage. Back to the show. In medieval London, there was an ordinance passed that made the homeowners keep the street in front of their homes clean, and garbage began being picked up via tumbrel, which I had to look up because who just off the top of their head knows what a tumbrel is. But a tumbrel is an open car that's tilted backwards to empty out its load. And initially, these loads were taken outside of the city and dumped just on the land or the riverbanks, because, and it's something that people talked about when I was reading it, like reading these articles. Cities, there weren't as many people, right? So that you would have these sparse landscapes between actual like cities and stuff like that. So you really could just like go outside of your city and just drop trash, and like it wouldn't be around and it wouldn't be in somebody else's city. It would just kind of just be like land. So it's something that you see a lot, happens in France as well. I think we'll mention later. Like I said, yeah, this was a common practice in Europe. During the 1400s, it was reported that mountains of garbage deposited just outside the city gates of Paris interfere with the defense of the city. So, I mean, you think Paris in the 1400s, you think, I don't know what you think, but you like to think it was beautiful and all this stuff like that. But I mean, you step just outside Paris and it's like quite literal mountains of garbage, of Parisian trash. In 1842, there was a report published by a guy named Edwin Chadwick that basically linked disease and garbage with the poor and tried to explain why they were still getting these diseases. And I'm paraphrasing, but this piece of literature led to a debate about garbage in the streets in relation to health. And in 1848, the Public Health Act was passed. So if it wasn't for this article by old Eddie Chadwick, maybe people would have never linked the idea between trash and disease. The Public Health Act was passed, and it established the General Board of Health, which focused on such matters as epidemics and disease. And the people around this time, about 30 years later, they soon looked to incinerators to start getting rid of their trash. And so the first incinerator for solid waste was built in England in 1844, and America followed suit the next year on Governor's Island and Allegheny, Pennsylvania in 1855. And Germany started doing the same thing about 10 years later. And by 1914, there were over 300 incinerators in the United States. Intimidating statistic there. But we really have to go back to 1883. Is that the name of that new Yellowstone offshoot? Is it 1883, 1881? I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. I love Yellowstone, of course. And as the hipster that I was growing up, I did like it before it was cool. Everybody's into it now. I've been watching that thing since day one. It's a good show, but that's why I think it might be 1883. But like I was saying, in 1883, in addition to there being a Yellowstone offshoot, during that time, there was a man named Eugene Poubelle, who was a French guy, and he created the first trash can. He is who we can thank for having trash cans in every room and everywhere you go. In fact, his name, Poubelle, is Poubelle, and I'm sure there's a cool French way to say it, but that name, Poubelle, is still a nickname for trash cans in French. Almost, I guess it's just like how we would call a trash can. They just call it a poubelle, and that's pretty interesting. 1883 saw the establishment of the poubelle law in Paris, and this law demanded that the use of closed containers and for the daily disposal of waste. And once this went into effect, many patents were filed trying to improve upon this process. And so the law basically said that commercial buildings had to have 3 bins of trash, one for compostable items, one for paper and cloth, and the other one for crockery and shells. And I can't for the life of me imagine what crockery is. I'm not even going to look it up because I just like to imagine. If you guys want to tell me or make up your own definitions of what crockery is, I mean, I've heard people use the word, but never in the terms of like trash or anything you would throw away. So that just, sometimes you like to, I like a little mystery, But no one really liked that idea. The businessmen, least of which, because the men who own the buildings had to pay for the bins and their supervision and their upkeep. And then the rag and bone men, which is the term that I just learned, didn't like it either because it made it harder for them to go out and go through people's trash and resell it. But I had no idea that rag and bone men existed. They talk about that in a number of articles. They didn't all give them names. That's one article I read. Gave them a name. It's just a pretty cool name, so I used it. But they mentioned that before trash cans became something that everyone used, it was a very commonplace for there to be like this kind of subsect of society that would go through people's trash and then sell it back, basically not like back straight to them, but like sell it to a place that would buy, secondhand goods or something like that. I mean, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. It's not so likely to happen now, but you could go into like a pawn shop or some secondhand shop and buy back what you already gave up in this world before trash cans existed. But yeah. And so the next piece that I have here, I've tried to find it more information to verify since I found it initially, and I have not been able to, but I'm going to go ahead and say it because no one ever said that, we're all facts here. We try to be mostly facts here, and I believe that there's some fact to this, but when I looked it up again, I couldn't find it. But it basically says that this guy named Gustav Schlacke invented the first garbage bag prototype, and that these were not quite what we know of today. They were made for the transport of garbage, which I mean, of course, garbage bags are, but for like in a vehicle of some sort. They were loaded into a cage, like structure on the back of carriages, and then taken away. So it was kind of like what we have today, except the bags sound like they were treated a little bit better because they were like kind of used specifically for like one purpose. And but yeah, so I like I said, I tried to find that, and just for continuity, I figured why not? I'll just leave it in. And if anyone knows where Gustav Schlacke, the real Gustav Schlacke, please stand up. We can find out whether or not this is true. And so the history of trash bags runs through Toronto, oddly enough. When there were no trash bags, people had to do things like steam clean their trash cans or wrap wet kitchen scraps in newspaper before disposing of their garbage, which is something that I never really thought of. And so I have a little quote here. It says, in early 20th century Edmonton, it was common to toss your trash into the river valley or throw it into the street. As cities started offering regular garbage pickup, households would generally put their ashes, glass, and food scraps straight into metal cans. And so a man named Frank Plump created the gar bag in Toronto in the late 1950s. Pretty cool name if you ask me. It's just take the E off of garbage and you got gar bag. By 1962, he had contracts with a number of hospitals and businesses in the area for his gar bag, basically, and he sold them on saving money from having to steam clean their cans. And also around this time, he begins designing those green residential trash bags. And green was said to match the color of their lawns because, I mean, that's a thing. And also to hide what they were throwing away. Now, when they said the color of their lawns, I was just like, who in their right